retirement is actually considered a risk factor for dementia. When people retire and they're like, oh, I don't have to work, I can watch TV, hang around, they're not doing all kinds of things and stimulating their brain. The brain, if you're not giving it inputs, it's going to degenerate. So we want to constantly be stimulating our brain.
Kat, it's so great to have you here. You come so highly recommended from our dear mutual friend, JJ Virgin. So really excited you're finally joining us. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So why don't we start by telling us about your personal health journey, which led you to the current amazing work you do. So let's start there.
I used to run a clinical trials research center. I'm a psychiatrist by training and a geriatric psychiatrist. And I have done over 100 clinical trials with all kinds of pharmaceutical drugs. And every time I got a new study, I would be excited, like, this is a new mechanism of action. Maybe this will help my patients. But after doing study after study and seeing people have some symptom relief, but not really get well, I finally started to get clear, like, I don't think the answer is in a pill. And one of my specialties was Alzheimer's, and I had done 20 long-term Alzheimer trials. And in the midst of doing these Alzheimer trials, when I turned 50 years old, which was 13 years ago now, I became as cognitively impaired as the patients in my dementia trials. And I would give them 3 words to remember on the mini mental status exam. And I had used these 3 words for over 20 years. And I could no longer remember the words. I was having to write them down while I quizzed my patients to be able to ask them the questions, right? And things just got so bad that gradually I realized it was time to stop doing what I was doing. And I moved all my research trials to another center and thought I was going to take 4 weeks off of work and get well. And it was a 3-year journey of getting well. And it got worse before it got better. So I basically had started having trouble using a computer. I couldn't remember how to do things that I used to know how to do. And I would drive my husband crazy, asking him over and over to come show me how to do something. And of course, he would get annoyed saying, wait, I just showed you that. And I wouldn't even remember that he showed me. And I started having trouble driving my car. I lost the ability to back up and parallel park my car. I would try over and over to parallel park and just get frustrated and say, okay, forget it. I'll go find another parking place. I had trouble dialing phone numbers. I would just get confused trying to hold the number in my head or look at the number and dial the phone number. And it really even got worse. I developed auditory processing problems. I kept going to my ENT doctor and asking him to give me hearing aids because when I listened to conversations, I would just hear like a little snatch of every word and I couldn't quite hear the whole word. And he kept telling me, Kat, you just have a mild hearing loss. You don't need any hearing aids. And I finally had a moment of truth. I was in a quiet restaurant late at night with a couple of friends, and I just couldn't participate in the conversation. I couldn't understand what was going on, and that was pretty terrifying. So I immediately went back to him. I said, look, just give me the hearing aids. I don't care. I need to do something. And he looked at me funny, and he said, Kat, the problem is not in your ear, it's in your brain. And they tested me and I had developed auditory processing problems. So my brain was not decoding what was being said. It wasn't that I couldn't hear it properly. I could not decode it. And so it was, quite a journey. And luckily, I had enough brain cells left that I learned about functional medicine. And I started studying with the Institute for Functional Medicine. And the first module coming up when I learned about it was autoimmune and allergy. And in the midst of all the cognitive problems, I also had developed multiple chemical sensitivity. So I was completely allergic to everything. I couldn't get out of a chair for a year, but if I could get out of the chair and go into a store, the smells would make me very sick. I was covered in rashes and hives and it coincided with the menopause transition, because I'm sure we can talk a bit about that, the role of hormones in the brain, but it was multiple things going on for me. And so as I learned functional medicine, I applied each module that I learned to myself. And gradually there came a day that my brain came back online. I was able, it was really exciting when I realized I could hold the 7 digits of a phone number in my head and dial the phone number again.
Wow. How long was that journey?
Well, it was definitely a 3 year process before I was able to go back to work. And, the exciting thing now is all that I've learned and done with my patients since then. We can help shift people much more quickly. I mean, I had a very broken brain and I was trying to learn things and figure out where do you get this and how do you do this test and, apply things to myself. So, with when I work with patients and I'll, we'll love to tell you about the clinical trial we did because we were able to have very dramatic changes in many of our patients with mild cognitive impairment and dementia in only 9 months.
Wow. Well, I'm so glad you're well. I'm so glad you're here to tell your story because I'm sure many people, when faced with the significant cognitive decline, you can't participate in a conversation. That's scary. And then you couple that with some of the sensitivities you were experiencing and not being able to get up. For many people, that would have led to a loss of hope and unfortunately, ultimately, a death sentence. But
Well,
but
and
you're here, and that's amazing.
with my favorite message that I just can't say enough times that dementia is not a death sentence. Now in all the trials that I did with people, we knew where they were going and it wasn't good. I mean, the average life expectancy once somebody is diagnosed with dementia is about 10 years. It goes faster for some people and it goes slower for some people, but it's about 10 years. So here I am 13 years out and my brain of course working far better far better than it was then. So I think the most important thing for me is just getting the word out that dementia. People think it's this mysterious disease. Oh, you might have some genetic risk. Well, you know what? I didn't have the ApoE4 genetic risk for Alzheimer's, and yet I still got quite demented. The genetics definitely can play a factor and confer a slightly higher risk for people, but it's really all of the epigenetic factors that are happening with our diet, our lifestyle, our illnesses, our infections, our hormones that are causing the neurodegeneration. So I like to tell people that it's not just this mysterious disease that just happens, but it happens for reasons. And usually a whole bunch of reasons. I mean, it's almost never one reason. I always have an exception to some of my rules like that, but it's usually a multiplicity of reasons. And so then our job becomes, okay, let's find all the reasons that the brain is starting to decline or degenerate, and then let's fix them, right? Because many of these things are fixable. And once we can, get everything going, the brain can come back online. We have, this beautiful neuroplasticity that's built into our brains that we can learn new things up until the time of death in our very old age. We are still learning and encoding new things. I mean, that's been shown in studies with head scans. They put people at the time of, almost at the time of death in old age into a head scanner and given them cognitive tasks to do, and they can show that there's new synaptic connections happening. So all the way through our life, not when I trained in medical school in the 80s, we were taught that by 18 you had all the neurons you were going to have, and that's it, and it was going to just be downhill from there. But that is not true.
So I like what you said that dementia isn't some mysterious disease that all of a sudden just happens, and it happens for a number of reasons, not just one reason, but a number of reasons. So, what are some of those reasons?
Right. Well, I think some of the reasons are very well known that people that have problems with, say, high lipids and their blood sugar control, those are known to damage the blood vessels and the flow, and we need our blood flow to go to our heart, to our kidneys, and to our brain. So when we have metabolic diseases like hyperlipidemia, hypertension, diabetes, those are pretty well established causes that can ultimately lead to dementia and cognitive decline. And then there's inflammatory states. There's all kinds of things that cause inflammation. So that takes us to kind of the foundational of of any kind of health is our diet, right? What we eat controls everything. And so if you're eating a really bad diet that's full of inflammatory foods, you're going to be inflamed. And when you have high levels of inflammation, that will drive and accelerate any other kinds of diseases that you have going on. And of course, inflammation in the brain wreaks all kinds of havoc in the brain. And then some of the things that oh, I should say, even people don't always think of this, but stress. We know that stress and depression are risk factors for dementia, and I think because they are, creating this inflammatory state in the brain. But the things that I really think a lot of people are missing with regard to dementia are the infections, the toxins, and the lack of hormones. And and the infections, I think COVID has taught the world a lot about what happens with a virus and the brain. Because we've been saying this for a long time, those of us working in work in reversing cognitive decline, there's all kinds of infections and viruses that love to go to our brain. And the best known before COVID was syphilis, right? In the century, in the 1800s, before we had antibiotics, people would get syphilis. They might have a sexually transmitted symptoms, and they would go away. And then down the road, some years later, the infected person would basically go crazy, right? Their brain was being eaten up, and they would get psychotic and demented. And so, an analogy to the syphilis is the epidemic we're having with Lyme disease. And especially with global warming right now, we're seeing Lyme marching all over the country. I live in California, and it's been found and reported in every single county of California. Though we have some areas like along the northern coast and here in the San Francisco Bay Area that has more. But Lyme is a spirochete, and syphilis is a spirochete. So they're the same type of, same class of organisms. And people can get Lyme disease, and it can, some people remain very, very ill and symptomatic, but some people have Lyme in little letters where, it might, cause some problems with their immune system and things may come and go, but they're not sick all the time. But it resides in the brain, as do some of the Lyme co-infections like Babesia, Bartonella. And over time, when we have infections in our brain, our immune system gets activated, and it's designed to kill the invaders. So even if we have sort of subclinical infections, um, when they start to reactivate or wake up, the immune system starts killing them. And you know, the world has learned about cytokines and the cytokine storm from COVID, right? You get the COVID infection, and especially with the earlier strains, our immune system would kick in, and some people would have a cytokine storm that was so intense trying to kill the bug that it would kill them. And so the cytokines, they're designed to release they release it. They're like inflammatory chemicals that are designed to help break down these invading particles, and then our immune system can phagocytize and eat them up and get rid of them. But if they're going on long term, they cause destruction. And so the infections are such a big thing. And one of the things that we do um, in working up all the causes of cognitive decline, I test all kinds of viruses: Epstein-Barr virus, herpes virus. We've long known that people that die with Alzheimer's have much higher incidence of herpes simplex 1 in their brain than people without Alzheimer's or dementia. And I should say that Alzheimer's is just one type of dementia. So there's many different types, and some have different pathologies, but they most of these types of dementias are happening for triggers and reasons.
So infections, I would classify as a less obvious factor. Something you've talked about as well, which to me is definitely not obvious: oral health.
Oral health, yes, and that is, the role of the oral microbiome. I mean, what's happening in our mouth with our gum disease and our infections and just our background microbiome in the mouth. You think about it; it's right next to the brain, and what's in the mouth and what's in the nose can travel right up into the brain so easily. We have our skull protecting us, but at the base where these things are connecting, there's this really porous plate called the cribriform plate. So it's quite easy for bacteria to track up into there. And so we have an increasing body of studies, coming out in recent years showing a very clear connection of what's happening in our mouth and the linkage with dementia. And I find now the biologic dentists are starting to test these things. We test them in our patients. There's testing we can order. There's actually 3 different companies now that are offering oral microbiome testing. And the one that I've been using, my Periopath, believe they test, is it 12 different strains. And they've figured out now, okay, these 3 strains link with dementia. These 3 strains link with heart disease. These 2 strains link with the joints and arthritis. So different types of pathogens in our mouth are going to different parts of our body and turning on different diseases.
Fascinating. So I was going to ask you, what is good oral health? How does one know? It sounds like it's not if my teeth are white or I have no cavities, or maybe that plays a role, but it's a microbiome test. Is that fair to say?
Right. Well, I think if you have no cavities, that's a pretty good thing. And what I have observed is people as they age, maybe they didn't have cavities when they were younger, but they're starting to get them, So, it's probably a combination of maybe they're not as good with their oral hygiene routines, and maybe their immune system's not doing as well. And where else does the microbiome come from? Our diet, right? What are we eating? Is what's setting the microbiome for us. So I mean, the obvious, of course, is oral hygiene, and some people have more proclivity to periodontal disease than other people. But I do think it probably does come down to their diet and their general state of inflammation. What's happening with that? I know at my dental office, they will swab your teeth and put it on the microscope, and then they have it on a big screen so we can all see what is in that sample, and then they'll look at the number of different types of microbes and tell me, oh, look, there's 1 or 2 things here, this is really good, this isn't bad. So my hope is that this will make its way into the dental offices, but then having some of the testing that we can do is now very, very helpful. And I want to tell you one little story about the testing. Your romantic partner, you're exchanging microbiomes with your romantic partner. And so my representative at my Periopath told me that she tested herself all the time because I guess she has free testing since she works for the company. And she didn't have cavities and everything was really good. And then she started dating a man who went on to become her husband, and she suddenly got a cavity. And so she tested him and she tested herself, and she had picked up some of his oral bacteria. So you're not in this alone. You do have to consider, if you have an intimate partner that, and even your dog, our dogs, we hug them, they kiss us, they lick us, you could be exchanging pathogens with people.
And what was the name of that test if folks want to
It's
go
called,
take a look?
yeah, my Periopath, Periopath.
Got it. And in addition to that test, it does sound like it's just basic oral hygiene, brush your teeth, floss, and get this microbiome test. And then diet plays a big role.
Right. And some people need to do more. I mean, some people need to do, water picks and more aggressive work if they're having gum disease. What we did in the dementia clinical trial that I know you and I will talk about is we actually we got a donation from the people that make biocidin, and they make antimicrobial toothpaste that it's made with natural products. And they also have a dental rinse. And so they donated the toothpaste and the dental rinse for our study. And so we had all of our patients in our dementia clinical trial for the 9 months they were in the trial using those products. And it was quite interesting. A couple of my patients said they didn't have any problems and they normally had good checkups, but their dentist would say, what are you doing? Your mouth looks really healthy. So it was kind of affirming that, they were on the right track, perhaps by using these products that were keeping their mouths better.
And so you've mentioned diet a couple times, and as you know, nutrition is a hot button issue, and there are various points of view in terms of what diet is the optimal diet for brain health to avoid cognitive decline. What's your point of view on diet?
Well, my point of view is diet is foundational, right? If we don't have a healthy diet, we could take all the supplements we want, but we're not going to undo an unhealthy diet. My other feeling is there's no one size fits all diet, right? We are all very different. We bring different things to the table. So, I mean, obviously, we want people eating a whole foods diet, without processed food. We want them eating organic to avoid all the toxins that are on the food. We want them eating free range meat and chicken and wild caught fish to avoid all of the problems with feedlot animals. But in our dementia clinical trial, which let me just say, since I haven't mentioned it, but I worked with Dale Bredesen and Anne Hathaway and Deborah Gordon on a clinical trial, a prospective clinical trial, with using a precision medicine or functional medicine individualized approach with our patients uh, to treat mild cognitive impairment and early dementia. And we had 25 patients in the study. It was a 9-month trial, and 84% of the patients in our study got better. And I can tell you that at my site, I had 10 patients at my site, and quite a few of my patients by the end of the study were testing completely normal. And so that was very, very exciting. In our study, we required that they ate a ketogenic diet. So this is, one of Dale Bredesen's favorite things is a ketogenic diet. And we know that with aging, a ketogenic diet is, we can either burn carbs, sugar and carbs as fuel, or if we deprive our body of sugar and carbs, we will shift into burning fat as fuel. And as we age, people lose their metabolic flexibility. When we're younger, we can easily shift between burning carbs and burning fats, but it gets harder to be able to break down, regulate the blood sugar, break down the carbs for people, some people with aging. So the thinking is, okay, if we shift them into fat burning, could that help? Well, we know that ketogenic diets actually have been used for more than a century. They were first started to be used with children that had intractable seizures. And they couldn't control the seizures, but when they put these children on a ketogenic diet, it did something to decrease the inflammation, change the transmission or the excitability of their brain, and they could resolve the seizures. So fast forward to now, actually, there's been a bunch of studies that have come out, a bunch, I mean, a handful, but some is better than none, even showing that people with bipolar disorder actually can calm down their mood disorder and their reduce their manic episodes and improve their functioning with a ketogenic diet. So we have a really clear signal that it's doing something in the brain. And for some people, when they eat a ketogenic diet, their brain just gets really clear. They have this clarity of their thinking. It does not happen for everyone, and I don't think it's the right diet for everyone. But definitely for some people, it's quite good. And then for the purposes of the study, we had to have everybody kind of following the same plans. So that's what we did. One other thing is when you're in a ketogenic state, it's been shown to increase your BDNF levels, and that is your brain derived neurotrophic levels. And BDNF is a hormone that helps us to make new connections, new synaptic connections in the brain. So we want more of that. So things that can give us more of that are wonderful. So for some people, the ketogenic diet is great, but other people can't tolerate it. Some people lose too much weight, and when we have older people that are not, that are more underweight, then that can be a serious problem. So. And we also don't know the ramifications of long-term keto, right? Is it good to be in keto long-term? Should you do intermittent keto? There's a lot of questions about that. So I think it's worthwhile for people to try, and especially, I mean, I have some patients. It gives them so much brain clarity that they want to keep eating that way. And other people, it doesn't make a difference. So maybe they're going to do better with, a paleo type diet.
So in this study, which you conducted with Dale Bredesen, who's been on the show, you say 84% of 25 patients. It's small, but 84%. And it's a real study. It's published in a real journal.
Right. A good journal.
A
Yeah.
good journal.
The
This is
Journal of
real.
Alzheimer's disease. Yeah.
Exactly. So something we were talking about before we started recording, why isn't this front page news? This is huge. No one gets better. But you've got a real study, 84% of 25 patients got better, and it's published in a real respected journal. Why isn't everyone talking about this?
Right. No, I mean, this is something that, is befuddling to those of us on the team and those of us doing this work. This should be international front page news. And, there's a lot of resistance from the academic community. They're still stuck in the amyloid hypothesis that there's going to be a drug that wipes out amyloid that cures Alzheimer's. And of course, we've had many, many failed trials for that. And, they're letting out, drugs like the aducanumab that just got approved in this last year that costs, $50,000 a year. I think up to 24% of people have brain bleeding from that medication. And just like the other drugs, it can slow down the decline slightly, but it's not making anyone better. And so, we're stuck in the academic medical centers, and the medical schools are all funded by the pharmaceutical industry. They're looking for a single drug cure, and we're not going to find that. Like I said, I came to that conclusion for all of my psychiatric disorders that I was working with. A single drug doesn't make us well. So, we're really trying to go with what will make us well, what can halt this process, and return the brain and the body to wellness.
There's no pill for a lifestyle modification grounded in a ketogenic diet.
I mean, it's not easy, to have to roll up your sleeves and exercise and meditate or practice mindfulness, because I would be remiss if I didn't say the two best validated ways to increase our BDNF and improve our brain are exercise and meditation. So in our study, those were requirements. Our patients had to exercise 6 days a week. They had to do some kind of mindfulness component. And what we chose for the purposes of our study was heart math. I'm sure you're familiar with heart math, but it's, I call it meditation for non-meditators, but it's, a very well validated method that, can improve your heart rate variability, which now HRV is a huge buzzword with all of the, biohacking devices we have. But HeartMath's been at it for, more than 20 years, trying to, help people improve their heart rate variability. And that it's such a simple little method that they have that even children can do it, and they, you get a device, you hook a sensor to your ear with your cell phone app that you purchase. And basically, it just tells you breathe in and breathe out, and it's synchronizing your breathing with your heart rate variability. And then they tell you to think of someone you love. And that, I think, is kind of their magic sauce, because when you think of someone you love, you release all these hormones like oxytocin, the love hormone, the bonding hormone, and that floods your brain with these, lovely feel good hormones. And when your brain is in a parasympathetic state, when it's in a calm zen state, that's when it can regenerate. That's when it can heal, right? We can't heal when we're in our type A stress going from this to that. And, that's not a healing state. So we have to take some time, every day to be in this, peaceful parasympathetic state, so that our bodies can just, have a rest, and things can regenerate.
So essentially a heart-centered meditation, if you will, with a focus on breath. And with regards to exercise, could you be a little bit more specific about what that program looked like for the folks in your trial?
Yeah, let's see if I can remember the exact specifics. And I do want to say, in our trial, we really had a Cadillac team to help support our patients. And, we all love, as physicians, we love to have our patients work with health coaches and nutrition people and exercise people. But not all patients are willing or able to do that. But one of the things that we saw in our trial was each one of our patients had a nutrition consultant, they had a health coach, and they had an exercise coach. And I tell you, having that dream team, I think, was one of the factors that helped people to shift more quickly, and that helped us to have such great results. So each of our patients had an assessment with their assigned fitness coach, and they had to do a combination of strength training, of cardiovascular training, and balance training, and high intensity interval training. And so the HIIT was done 2 to 3 days a week, for a short amount of time. The HIIT data is so beautiful that you only have to do it a couple minutes of getting your heart rate up to, almost maximum. And then all kinds of metabolic things ensue, and it just can help all kinds of metabolic factors. So the HIIT is, such a great thing to do, and you can incorporate that into whatever you're doing. I mean, if you're running, you just run harder. If you're hiking, you push as hard as you can for 2 minutes. But you can do things easily at home. Jumping jacks, and there's just all kinds of things you can do to push your heart rate up. But you only want to do that for a really short period of time, and because we've actually learned that over exercising is worse for your heart than no exercising. So too much exercise and too much training causes all kinds of oxidative stress that will worsen things for our bodies. Then people did different things depending on what they liked and what their exercise person told them. But we definitely like them to do strength training. With aging, of course, people can get cachectic and lose their muscles, and we want them to do core work and balance training, because we really need to prevent falls as we age, right? So it was a combination of all those things. We did ask them to exercise 6 days a week, and I believe they, trying to remember exactly what the number of minutes they were, but I mean, I think the biggest thing was at least 25 to 30 minutes 6 days a week, and we preferred if they did 45 to 60 minutes. And one thing we found was the people who did more in the study, there were minimum requirements. So they had to do those things. They had to do the heart math every day. They had to do brain training also, the heart math and brain training and exercise 6 days a week, right? I mean, some people, you need, to have a day off, and you don't, of course, train really hard every day either. But we incorporated brain training as a way to help with the neuroplasticity. So they had to do all those things every day. But I had I had one patient who came into the study. He is an ApoE44, so he has both two copies of the gene that we know confers a higher risk for Alzheimer's. And when you have an E4 gene, what it does is people have a more exuberant amyloid response. So when our brain is injured, it will secrete amyloid to try to, it's like a gooey, sticky substance. And if you have an injury, be it an infection or a toxin or an allergen that's activating the immune system, the brain can secrete the amyloid to try to protect that neuron from damage. But when you have chronic things causing damage, you will have more and more amyloid, and then eventually it will gum up the works, and your brain will stop working and start degenerating. And so people with an E4 allele have a more exuberant amyloid secretion. So if you're a 4 and I'm a 3, and we have the same infection, your brain will make more amyloid than mine. And so therein is sort of the problem, and why investigators have been all hung up on the amyloid hypothesis. Okay, well, let's get rid of the amyloid. Well, we have drugs. I worked on drug studies that we could get rid of the amyloid, way more than 10 years ago. We could show on the PET scans the amyloid was gone, but people didn't get better. And we've learned in our, functional medicine, precision medicine world, it's like, no, we have to go, upstream, and we have to look at the factors that cause the amyloid there.
Can you talk a little bit about the amyloid hypothesis and the history of it, and kind of where we are today and how it has really led us astray? And
Yeah, well, we're still there today. There's several studies going on right now. They pop up on my Facebook feed. Eli Lilly's recruiting for another amyloid drug. So this is still, considered the holy grail of the academic research community. let's wipe out the amyloid, because it is clear that amyloid is not a good thing if we have too much of it in our brain. But as I said, we've had drugs for years that could wipe out the amyloid, and it just didn't translate to people getting better clinically, right? So that's our benchmark. Who cares if you wipe out the amyloid? We need you to function better. And it's I don't I mean it's pretty amazing that some information came to light a few months ago about one of the first labs that had discovered the linkage with amyloid and causing destruction in the brain. And one of the, I believe he might have been a postdoc at the time, and now he's a professor working on this project, had falsified or overinterpreted or overstated some of the data, and it's called into question the whole hypothesis, and yet billions of
Yes.
dollars are still being dumped into, let's still find another amyloid drug.
Yes, to further the point, essentially, a lot of this hypothesis was based off a study where it turns out years later, this person was exposed for fabricating parts of the study. In some ways, a fraud, whether intentional or not.
Right.
And here we are still looking at this hypothesis when it's all based off this original study, which years later exposed fraud. And so here we are still. It's kind
Well,
of
and
baffling.
I mean, one thing that Dale Bredesen has told me is there may be a role for this type of drug once we work on resolving all the factors that are causing the amyloid to be deposited. Maybe then, when we've got everything in balance, for some people perhaps, could it be useful to then give a drug to do a little cleanup after you stop all of the mitigating factors.
Exactly, but it's not a silver bullet. Not a silver bullet.
But we don't know. And you can, it's just like I said, you can't just think you're going to be healthy by taking a lot of supplements but eating a crappy diet.
So you've mentioned a couple of times in the context of prevention and reversal brain training. I want to come back to brain training. What exactly is brain training?
So interestingly, we've had a couple studies that show that dancing, particular tango dancing, can be very helpful for people with dementia. And I think one of the factors with something like tango dancing is it's a partner's dance. It's a couple's dance, right? You're dancing with a partner, so it gives you an even another level of brain stimulation besides the input of the music and the rhythm and the movements, which is a social connection. And so we know that being socially connected is something that actually facilitates more longevity and better aging. But back to how, so social connections stimulate the brain, and I do want to say that retirement is actually considered a risk factor for dementia. When people retire and they're like, oh, I don't have to work, I can watch TV, hang around, they're not doing all kinds of things and stimulating their brain. The brain, if you're not giving it inputs, it's going to degenerate. So we want to constantly be stimulating our brain. Excuse me. So one of the ways that we can stimulate the brain is brain training. I mean, it's long been known that crossword puzzles are getting you to think and plan and strategize. How do you fit all those words into the boxes? And so we kind of evolved past that. And those are still good. It's still good and fine to do crossword puzzles if people like them. But there's a couple of programs that have developed to give you to train actually different parts of your brain. I think Luminosity was one of the first ones out there, and the one that we're using in our studies in our patients is called Brain HQ. It was developed out of a group at UCSF, and Brain HQ has tons of research studies, and it's been incorporated in a lot of research studies with cognitive issues and mood issues and ADHD issues. I mean, basically, they have very nice data showing that this methodology can help and change things in the brain.
If I'm currently healthy and I'm not experiencing any sort of cognitive decline, but I'm focused on prevention, I'm concerned about it, I don't want a problem to ever arise. What are the, say, the top 3 or 5 things I should focus on today?
definitely, being healthy, and you're probably healthy because of your diet and lifestyle. So, definitely the diet can't go anywhere without that foundation. And then sleep. Our brains detoxify and regenerate while we sleep. So we definitely need to take steps to protect our sleep, get enough sleep. And we only discovered a couple of years ago that we have this glymphatic system in our brain, and it's like our lymphatic system in our body, but it's the same thing in our brain. And when we sleep and when we get into the deeper phases of sleep, those lymphatics start expanding. The ventricles that have the fluid in our brain expand, and they start churning around the fluid in there. And some people have said it's like a washing machine. It's like, cleaning out all the particles and toxins that we've accrued that day. And when you think about not getting enough sleep, I've written it out for talks, but okay, if you're getting 6 hours a night sleep instead of eight, which eight is, could be seven. Some people need nine. I mean, it's a little different for everyone. But if we use eight as our benchmark of a healthy night's sleep, if you're sleeping 6 hours a night, then you lose 14 hours a week. And then, translate that times four. How many hours a month are you cheating your brain of detox? And then how many hours a year? So chronically not getting enough sleep is a big issue. And then also with regard to sleep, or the problems with sleep apnea, we definitely test all of our patients. And I think for anybody that's having a sleep problem of any age, of any build, like, you're thin and you don't look like the big, stocky, overweight person that we would think of with sleep apnea. But I have found sleep apnea in thin women. So if people are having a sleep problem, I do urge them to get a sleep study, and those can now be done at home. So you could go to the sleep lab and get, the device, but you could wear it at home, which is a little more naturalistic than having to go to a sterile sleep lab and be hooked up to all kinds of things. But the home studies are good screens for sleep apnea. So anybody having insomnia problems, get that checked out for sure. Make sure it's not sleep apnea, because if you have sleep apnea, you're not getting enough oxygen to your brain while you sleep. And if you don't have oxygen, you're killing brain cells, you're killing also your heart cells. Anybody with sleep apnea over time is going to develop congestive heart failure. So it's a huge risk factor. So let's say diet, sleep, and exercise, I'd probably put right up there, right? I feel like one of our best ways to have healthy aging is to keep moving and keep exercising. And I think we can all see it, people who, get older and aren't moving. And I mean, I see people my age and I think, I'm not that age, I must be 20 years younger than that, because, it's a different thing when some people get into their 60s. They're very old, but I mean, our generation has the longest projected lifespan. Sadly, the generations behind us are having shorter lifespans because of the toxicity of the world. Um, but I think exercise. So those three things I think are the biggest things. And then if people are having problems, then they need to dig deeper and do prevention, meaning, treat any of these factors. A couple other factors I should just mention. Midlife hearing loss is a huge risk factor for dementia, and it is the biggest modifiable cause uh, of dementia. I mean, it's easy to fix. You get a hearing aid, right? So if people are having a hearing loss, now we're encouraging them, please get that checked out early. I feel like, things start declining at 50, and, you need to keep up with your hearing exams and your vision exams, because if you're not hearing and you're not seeing properly, you're not getting those inputs into your brain all the time. So hearing loss is something that I do feel like people, as they are aging, they should have that on their awareness.
That's interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that.
Yeah, and it is number one modifiable risk factor.
So, in closing, where do you think the field is going? What excites you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so excited about the work that we do, as you can tell, because I have patients that get better, and I just like to tell you one quick story. I had I had a patient that came to me. It's been over 5 years, and he had lost his driver's license because of his dementia, and he was, very dedicated patient. He did everything. We reversed the dementia. He got his driver's license back, which doesn't usually happen in the classical world with dementia. But that was a bunch of years ago, and I just saw him recently, and I had him repeat his cognitive testing, and he has maintained his gains for the last 5 years. Like, he has not declined a bit on his cognitive testing. And he told me that when he went for diagnosis, he went to, our big academic center here is UCSF, Memory and Aging Center. He went there for his diagnosis, and they told him, it's time for you to start visiting nursing homes because it's time. You need to start looking at nursing homes. So here I have this gentleman 5 years later, reversed things, has held steady. And it just breaks my heart to think that this is what he was told. I had no idea he was told that, because I can tell you that's very traumatizing for my patients to be told, go get your affairs in order, and there's nothing we can do other than possibly slow things down for a year with taking a medication like Aricept. So I'm super excited. We have a great team of dedicated researchers, and we're working on our next research study. We've been working on it more than a year. We just submitted it to the IRB 2 weeks ago, and we've brought in more investigators, exciting biomarkers now, the newer things that we're going to be testing, like amyloid levels and tau levels and neurofilament light levels, and the true diagnostic epigenetic aging testing. We're testing BDNF levels before and after. So we've got a lot of interesting markers to look at. But we have a big study team where we're all putting our heads together and trying to push the envelope. What else helps the brain? Some of my colleagues are doing QEEG brain mapping and then doing laser treatments to the brain and getting some marvelous results. So, I just feel like if we can keep looking at the causes and, keep expanding our repertoire of all of the factors that we can study and treat, we have every reason to be excited about where the field is going. And, my hope is that eventually the academic centers will embrace this, because we need big systems to help with this. I feel like it will be accessible for more people when we can get it into the healthcare systems.
100% agreed. And Kat, thank you so much for all of the incredible work you're doing. And please keep us posted on all those studies. We got to have you back and talk about them. I agree. It's an exciting time in the field, and it's not going to be a silver bullet pill. Maybe it will be, but I don't think so. I think it's going to be lifestyle modification driven by a lot of the work you and Dale are doing. So thank you so much.
Oh, and let me just, there's so many things that I keep thinking that I should say, but I mentioned it, but I would feel like I'd be remiss to not say it, because not the silver bullet, but definitely looking at the toxins and looking at the role of hormones. We could have a whole other conversation about these things, but they're all factors for the brain beyond, starting with the healthy people, the diet and lifestyle modification. But once people have symptoms, they should be aggressive at looking at all of these factors.
Well, just I can't leave on leaving us hanging with the toxins and the hormones. So let's go there quickly. We've got a couple more minutes if you do. So let's go there quickly. Tell us about the toxins and hormones. You can't leave us hanging.
Okay, yeah, I know. It's all so exciting. Okay, so the hormones, we have receptors in our brain for all of the things that we think of as sex hormones. So estrogen, men and women have receptors in their brain. Testosterone, men and women have receptors. Progesterone, we have receptors. And then pregnenolone, which is the grandmother hormone, that's the precursor to all those hormones, and DHEA. These are hormones that are easy to test. We can test them at Quest and LabCorp. We can look at the levels. We already know past a certain age that men and women are not going to have estrogen. The women won't have estrogen because their ovaries have, given up, and men won't have testosterone because their gonads have given up. But in both genders, measuring all these and repleting the hormones, not to the level of when you were 18 or 20 years old, but just getting people in the middle of the hormone range, has been huge for people's brain. And there was a fabulous study done a few years ago at Stanford, and they took women that were at high risk for dementia that had been on hormones, and they randomized them either to continue their hormones or stop their hormones. They followed them for 2 years. They did head scans and neuropsych testing. And at the end of 2 years, 100% of the women who stopped their hormones had degeneration in their brains that they could see on the head scans, which is significant.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So the role of hormones in the brain, and people are worried about cancer risk from hormones. Well, it turns out that that there's more studies coming out that taking hormone replacement after breast cancer is actually protective from a recurrence, because the breast needs those hormones to be healthy as well. So, using bioidentical hormones, giving our estrogen transdermally through the skin and not by mouth, in a bioidentical form, actually has less cancer risk and not more cancer risk, which we have these big studies in hormones that say, oh, they can cause cancer. Those are the older synthetic hormones that are in all these studies that keep getting cited over and over again. So hormones, and they'll also save your brain, your skin, your hair, all kinds of things, because you have receptors for these hormones all over your body. They're not just sexual hormones. A plug for the hormones.
And what about toxins?
And the toxins. So as you know, the world is getting more and more toxic. The heavy metals are kind of a no-brainer. They need to be tested for. We definitely see higher levels on average of things like mercury and lead and cadmium, but we can detox these things quite easily for a lot of people. You don't need aggressive IV detox for the majority of people. For my patients with mercury, what I do is, when I see elevated mercury level, and the labs reported as over 4 is positive, but I don't want to see it over 1, and I really want to see it 0. And so we know that sweating is a great way for our bodies to detoxify. And there's been nice studies done that show that we will excrete toxic chemicals, we'll excrete heavy metals when we sweat. So something like sauna or hot yoga or something that makes you sweat on a regular basis is, again, a natural thing that our bodies can do. But with the caveat that I tell people, when you're sweating, have a towel there and wipe it off as it comes. And then after you do a sauna or a heavy exercise, go jump in the shower with some soap and wash it off, because you've just mobilized all these toxins and you don't want them to dry and reabsorb back into your body. But say, for example, with the mercury, I have my patients, if they do have an elevated mercury and cognitive issues, I tell them, for 4 to 6 months, no seafood at all, not even the smashed fish. Like, let's just not have any risk of you bringing in the mercury. I give them liver support. I really like using sulforaphanes. I have a favorite, broccoli extract, Avimacol, that's got, beautiful research. I love research. I love companies that will show me that this product really works. And I've seen that work over and over for brain fog in people with mycotoxins, which is something else we didn't even get into here. But the mold toxins are killer for the brain and a huge factor for people. But I can just basically take people off of seafood, give them some liver support, ask them to do some sweating, and I'll see mercury levels come down over 4 to 6 months, often to 0.
Wow.
So, it's not like rocket science to get that done. But what I think is, we need to detox. It needs to be a part of our lives, because the world is so toxic these days. Even if we're eating organic food, you can test people and everybody is positive for glyphosate or Roundup. They say it comes down in the rain. We have chemicals in our water. So even when you're, trying to live a clean lifestyle and really careful about what you put on your skin and your hair and what you wash your hands with, people still get exposed to toxins. So, having a practice of sweating, doing, perhaps some, nice liver support. You can eat lots of broccoli and lots of vegetables as well. Vegetables have a way of naturally helping detox for us.
100% agreed. We're mindbodygreen after all. You could be doing all that meditation, eating organic, exercising, but if you're letting toxins take over your life, It's going to negate a lot of that good stuff you're doing. So we totally get it. And it's critical.
And what we see when we test people is that some people are just poor detoxifiers genetically. I would be one of those. One more reason that I got sick, even though, I had eaten organic food for 20 years before I got sick, but my genetics are not the greatest for, some of the mutations that cause problems with detox. And I had a patient early on when I started working with cognitive decline, and she was already in a nursing home. But I was testing everything to see what can we help with. And because she hadn't had hormones for a while, and she had some cardiovascular disease, not horrible. Well, when I did her toxin screen, Great Plains Lab has a urine tox screen, and it tests, I don't know, I get multiple pages of chemicals that they're testing. This woman had first off, let me say that if you have one thing in the red or two things in the yellow, it's considered significant. She had 9 things in the red, like it was red, 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 red. She was off the charts, toxic. So what that told me was, and you would think, okay, maybe she worked in an occupation with a lot of chemicals. No, she was a school teacher. So, she was not working in some, industrial setting. She didn't live on a farm with lots of chemicals. And so I promptly suggested to her daughter that we get a tox screen on her, since they shared the same genetics, and she was about 50, the daughter, and sure enough, the daughter had pretty high levels of toxins. So some people are going to be, worse at detoxifying than others, but it's definitely something I just feel like if we can all incorporate that, of course, be super careful of not allowing ourselves to be exposed to toxins, but, working on the sweating and the liver support is probably a good thing.
And in terms of testing, if one's curious to know how well they're equipped to detoxify, what types of tests could one do?
Well, I think that, to actually test your toxin levels is a pretty good indicator. I mean, there's all kinds of genetic testing now, and you can look at your, glutathione genes and your SOD superoxide dismutase genes and this and that. I mean, there's multiple ones, right? But you can't change the genes, but you can change what's turning those genes off and on. So I think rather than looking at what are our genes, the proof is in the pudding of looking at how toxic are we. That's going to actually give us more direct information that we can use to change our destiny. So definitely, as I mentioned, I don't think genes are our destiny. It's these epigenetic diet, lifestyle, toxin, infection factors that are turning the genes on and off that are causing the problems. I did want to say, if people are interested in the type of testing that I do and, a general overview of this method, I do have on my website a free ebook that goes in some detail to describe the method for people of what I'm using. And that might be helpful to understand some of the tests that you might want to do or ask your doctor to test for you.
And we'll put the link in the show notes, but what is the website URL for people?
DementiaDemystified.com.
DementiaDemystified.com. Kat, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all that you do and, helping people to stay healthy and bringing all this information to them. Really grateful for the work you've done for so long that I have followed. Thank you so much for helping us to share this message too, that dementia is not a death sentence.
Well, Kat, thank you so much. So appreciate it.